Good morning, world. I'm Steve Rao, the host of World Edition on Pod TV, formerly IBM TV. And on World Edition, we bring you great news from around the world and talk about sustainable innovations and what we can do to build back better and stronger from the COVID pandemic. Today, we have a very special guest who I'm going to introduce in a minute and a half for 2 minutes to talk about Father's Day. But I want to begin my remarks, first of all, by wishing everyone out there a happy Father's Day weekend. And we pray for anyone out there who has lost a father from any illness or from this pandemic. More on Father's Day in a minute. But I wanted to just take a minute or two to talk about Juneteenth, for I will not be here tomorrow to give my monologue. Juneteenth, for those of you around the world who are listening to this show today, marks the day in 1865, June 19th, when enslaved Texans learned that they were free, Black Americans. This was 2 months after Robert E. Lee's surrender and end of the Civil War, and 2.5 years after President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. Most people do not realize in the US and the world, at least 59% of our children in our schools, that slaves existed in the United States until December 1865, although the 13th Amendment was passed in January of 1865. I could go on and on about what this means in terms of just celebrating the freedom of all Americans. We really have had two Independence Days in a great nation of America. July 4th, Independence Day, but a second Independence Day, Juneteenth, when this nation was supposed to live out the creed of our Constitution that all men are created equal, regardless of their race, their religious beliefs, the color of their skin. But the irony is, and a conversation for us to have as we celebrate Juneteenth events and we gather, is how a country can celebrate the idea of freedom and liberty for also at the same time throughout the history of our nation oppressing and treating an entire group of people as property, bringing them to the shores of these land in chains, separating them from families, disenfranchising them from homeownership, and not making the investments so that they can enjoy the American dream alongside each and every one of us. Abolitionist Frederick Douglass acknowledged July 4th Independence Day as an inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. I want to close out with just my final thoughts on Juneteenth. Why I believe it's more than just an opportunity to talk about the importance of freedom and to have a continued conversation on what we can do as leaders and training our next generation to make sure they understand that the battle for equity and justice never ceases. Because we can never forget the experiences of those who fought every day to seek freedom for future generations. I see race relations in America as a constant battle, a battle between those who want equity and justice and equality and those who oppose it. This battle continues to exist in America to the present day, and it's a battle that we should always fight for to make sure that freedom is enjoyed by all of us. I believe that Juneteenth gives us an opportunity an opportunity to train our next generation on the value of freedom and the fact that the soldiers of our military and the brave leaders of our nation have been fighting for this since the founding of our country. The team at Pod TV wishes everyone around the United States of America a happy Juneteenth. We thank President Biden and the United States Congress for recognizing this as the 12th federal holiday, which the president is expected to sign any day now. And on that note, I want to bring in a very special guest, Kenneth Perry, to talk about Father's Day. He is one of the founders of the Fathers Conference, the Nation Conference on Fatherhood, And we've been introduced to him by Matthias Bishop, our friend. And in light of this, we want to talk about Father's Day, but also get his perspective as a Black American on Juneteenth and the kinds of things that we're going to be talking about in light of President Obama's founding of the organization BAM, where he was on CNN a few days ago, actually talking about an organization he started to help Black American fathers raise families. So, Kenneth, welcome to the show. I want to give you a chance to talk about Father's Day and the National Fathers Conference. And I was a little bit hard to summarize Juneteenth in 2 minutes, but I did my best. So thank you, sir. Can you hear me, Kenneth? Kenneth?
Sorry.
There you
Trail.
We're having some technical difficulties, folks. We're going to be bringing Kenneth back on in a minute. Kenneth, are you there?
I can see you, but I can't hear you.
Huh.
Trail.
Mark, can you hear me?
I hear you. Yes, I hear you, and I don't know why Kenneth can't hear us. Maybe we'll bring in Nick because he was saying that he can hear everybody, but definitely we're having some technical difficulties. So definitely it sounds like Kenneth can hear us, but of course we're hearing his background noise and everything. But you're right about Juneteenth. As a matter of fact, there's going to be a Juneteenth celebration at HATAC, which is an African American Cultural Arts Center here in Durham, on tomorrow. That'll be from 3 until 9, and it'll definitely feature a lot of things in that regard. And then I just found out not that long, some friends of mine are going to do a big celebration, I believe coming out of the Texas area, of course, where you know that a lot of folks know that that is part of the history of Juneteenth as well, in terms of where Juneteenth was first originally launched and all of that. So definitely there are events throughout the country to celebrate, as you called it, the second Independence Day. And I would definitely agree with that. And a lot of folks, as you also noted, don't necessarily know the history of Juneteenth and its importance to our society and along those lines. So definitely it comes to a point that Nick Valveda brings up a lot of times, which is the sore lack of knowledge within our education system. So, we definitely need to do better within our education system in terms of making these very important dates known and everything. I even would dare to say that some people may not know the dates of the Selma March, if we want to talk civil rights, and a number of other things as well. So, Nick, it sounds like Juneteenth may be another case of education not getting the kind of knowledge that it should be getting in terms of actually letting our folks know about the importance of Juneteenth and other things that are out there as well.
Yeah, as you know, Mark, there's history, revisionist history, and really the real history, which is hard to find. But the thing is, when you're studying history and you're studying slavery that existed actually all over the world, but here was the problem: Great Britain actually had eliminated it years way before the United States, and so did Spain. If you look at it, the last country to eliminate slavery almost that was civilized was the United States of America, which wasn't very good. And arguments have been made, probably correct. I have a whole book back there on the Mexican War, the U.S.-Mexican War, Mark. It wasn't about Texas defend the Alamo and all this other garbage. What it was about was the Texans wanted to keep slavery, and it was illegal in Mexico. I mean, if you can imagine that. So the war that we had, the Mexican-American War, in other words, of course, history is from the victor's side. It's all about how, the Mexicans attacked the Alamo, how bad it is, all this other stuff. But it really was an invasion of the United States into Mexican territory to support slavery, which the Mexicans in Santa Anna were against. All right. So, but that part of history is not told. They just kind of eliminate, except there was a professor who wrote a whole book on that particular area. And the same problem with even the Revolutionary War that we praise, who was it, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, our founding fathers. But the problem was, from a certain standpoint, they wanted to succeed from Great Britain, not because of anything except they wanted to adopt slavery here in the United States, where there was a trend. It wasn't eliminated back then, but there was a trend and a movement in Great Britain to eliminate it. So interesting that how history is taught and what you learn later are basically two different things, because you only learn it from one person's viewpoint. In other words, history is written by the victors, as they say. It's not written by the person who lost the war. But now they're doing a lot of, they're doing a lot of research, scholarly research on that particular area. I didn't know that they were going to make Juneteenth a national holiday. Is that something Joe Biden's going to do?
Yes, he's actually going to do it today. As a matter of fact,
Really?
he is set to sign a bill to establish Juneteenth as a national holiday, a federal holiday, and it'll be the date marking the end of slavery. And
Right.
as a matter of fact, this afternoon at 3:30 will be a signing event, which will come 2 days before Juneteenth itself, which falls on June 19th each
Right.
year. So Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris are both slated to deliver remarks in the East Room, according to the White House. So that will actually become the 12th legal public holiday, and the first new one created since Martin Luther King Jr. Day was signed into law in 1983 by then President Ronald Reagan. So definitely that's going to be an amazing thing. And as Steve was alluding to earlier, Juneteenth marks the date that the last enslaved African Americans were granted their freedom. And on that day in 1865, Union soldiers led by General Gordon Granger arrived in the coastal city of Galveston, Texas, to deliver General Order Number 3, officially ending slavery in the state. So the final act of liberation came months after the Confederate armory's surrender ended the Civil War, and more than 2 years after President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. So
we don't know what happened to Kenneth, guys, but I'm going to go ahead and make a quick announcement real quick, or we can continue this conversation, but I don't know what happened. We couldn't hear him. Before I interrupt, for those of you listening, and hopefully Kenneth will come back, and we're going to continue. We're going to devote this show to Juneteenth. We have a fatherhood conference on June 19th. You can go to ncfatherhood.com, and this is a national conference on fatherhood, where there's going to be some very important conversations about fatherhood, the importance of fatherhood. Some talk about, the kinds of things President Obama talked about as he started this group called BAM, and kind of like looking at also minority communities and all communities and the importance of fathers. And so if Kenneth doesn't come back, I'll repeat it at the end, but it's ncfatherhood.com. Kenneth, are you there? He still can't hear us, so I don't know what's going on. Sorry, guys. Technical.
No problem. Kenneth is trying to get his sound going, and maybe Nick can help work that out, and I can try to as well. But yes, fatherhood is very important. I know that I am a big supporter of my dad, not being a father myself, but definitely having fathers, of course, in my life. My dad is one of my primary mentors and is a mentor to others as well, because he's been involved in the art community for a number of years, and he's actually even mentored a lot of folks around the community in arts and in media and in a number of other things out there. And of course, my younger brother is the father of my 2 nephews, but is also very much involved in the work with at-risk youth and things along that line. So definitely somebody that has shown me the importance of being a good father and all of that. And sometimes we hear too much of the negative sides of the African American population, and those that are the quote unquote deadbeat dads, and those folks that are falling in that category. But I would argue that there are quite a few, and matter of fact, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of folks that are doing the right things in terms of being fathers and in terms of supporting their families and all of that. So definitely we need to commend those folks that are doing it right, while also acknowledging that there are folks that are not doing right in terms of raising families and things of that nature. But definitely we need to work on even trying to raise good fathers out there, and even teaching some of the principles of being a good father in life and all of that. So definitely, I just recently was on a call not that long ago with a friend of mine who had actually was a mentor, and I can't remember if he's a father himself, but he was a mentor to a young man, and that young man's life was actually taken from him after he had, kind of committed to going on a more straight and narrow path and all of that. I think he'd even gone into either college or technical college, and then he'd come back home, and his life was taken, very tragically and all of that. And that was actually out of the state of North Carolina. I'm trying to remember where the gentleman was at. But, we need to try to do as much as we can with these fatherhood initiatives and these other initiatives to help give the support to the fathers that are out there. So that's just some of my thoughts on it that come to me immediately.
So, Kenneth, can you hear us?
I can.
Oh,
wow.
wonderful. Yeah. Okay, great.
Sorry for
Technology
what
finally
you-
worked.
Okay, great.
Right.
So I'm sorry for the delay. So we wanted to take a few minutes, but Kenneth, we would like you to stay with us if you can, because we're going to be
Okay.
talking about Juneteenth, and I think getting your perspective would be so important. So we're now going to, particularly, I just finished my monologue, and we have with us Kenneth Perry, who is one of the founders of the Fatherhood Conference, and he's really involved with it. So Kenneth, talk to us a little bit about the Fatherhood Conference, when it is, what brought this about, and how do we put this in the context of Juneteenth and disenfranchised communities and just communities in general across this country of the importance of fatherhood?
Well, thanks so much for having me on. I am Kenneth Perry. I'm the co-chair for the North Carolina Fatherhood Conference. This is the 8th year that we're having the conference. Normally it's live. This year it's going to be virtual. Last year we couldn't have it because of the pandemic. So we're so excited to be back this year. The whole purpose of the conference is to help dads know how important it is to stay present in their kids' lives. So that's the primary reason why we have the conference. The other thing is that we want to celebrate and honor dads. A lot of times, if you look at the top 5 holidays or special occasions, Mother's Day is the one that goes into that. When we talk about fathers, they're probably the last, the bottom 50. So we want to just celebrate fathers. But the Fatherhood Conference is going to be virtually. It starts on June the 19th, and it runs from 8:30 to 1:30. And we have a whole series of workshops. And this is just giving a lot of tools to men in the community of how to be better fathers, how to be present in the kids of their lives, so they can help tell the story, their own story, opposed to someone else saying what's going well or not. But also with Juneteenth, it happening on Father's Day. Traditionally, we always have our conference on the day before Father's Day, and this year, of course, it happened to be on June 10th. So that's significant also, because we want men to know how important it is to have the journey. And as you know, a lot of with June 10th, the part of that was that the conversation, the news didn't travel along for a long period of time. So a lot of the a lot of folks in the community didn't even know that the Emancipation Proclamation had occurred, and that it took a long time to get that information. So the connection with fathers being made to protect their community, be part of the community, that has a significant connection with Juneteenth.
It's fantastic. I mean, this is incredible, and I think that we're going to continue the conversation. I think one question I have for you is, so June 19th, that's the conference. It's ncfatherhood.com. You can go sign up. Tell Reverend White I said hi. I mean, he's an old friend of mine. I haven't seen him in a year and a half. He's a great guy. Tell him Steve Rao said hi. The other thing is that President Obama was on CNN last week with Anderson Cooper, and he started an organization called BAM, and he brought in some fathers that were young kids actually when he had started this organization, and now they're fathers. And he talked about the importance of fatherhood, and we saw a lot of growth in these young men. So do you think it's important to continue to make these investments and have some of these sometimes uncomfortable conversations, which hopefully we'll have at this conference?
Very much so. And I think that's really significant. In fact, one of the things that President Obama started while he was in office was called the Barbershop Buzz. And one of our pre-conference events is the Barbershop Buzz, where we have two facilitators that the North Carolina Fatherhood Conference trained, they go into the barbershop or salon and have a conversation about how do you protect your community. Some of these general conversations have been going on for a while in the salon and the barbershops, and then they kind of throw an issue on the floor and then get some discussion going from all of the participants in the barbershop. And we had 3 of those going on for this 2 weeks ago in 3 different locations at the barbershop. But part of that, President Obama talking about some of that growth opportunities for the young folks is kind of helping them know what their story is so they can tell their own story about how they protect their community, but also what part do they play in that being a responsible dad.
Okay, fantastic. I mean, I think that's Mark. Do you have any questions? Our panelists, Nick Paudiva and Mark Lee. Do we have any questions for Kenneth? And we're going to ask.
One of the things I was going to ask Kenneth, and I'd actually alluded to it just in some of my opening remarks and everything after you had made yours, Steve, is that too often I feel, and I actually have friends that are single fathers as well as having friends that are single mothers, but I oftentimes feel that the single fathers are oftentimes overlooked and are oftentimes getting a short thrift by our media and by our society and everything. Oftentimes we spend too much time speaking about the negative aspects of the fathers that are the deadbeat dads and the ones that are in that category. And while not wanting to let them off the hook, I think that we need to celebrate those that are actually doing good as fathers. And I was just wondering if Mr. Perry had thoughts about that, about how the media portrays fathers, particularly in our African-American community, because I do feel that too often we hear about the conversations of those that are not doing right in terms of paying child support or are not doing right in terms of raising their kids, and some of these kids getting into that gang mentality and all of that. But I was just thinking, like, I know quite a few that are of different classes, everything from middle class to poor to even some that might be considered wealthy, that I think are great fathers. And like I said, for whatever reasons, God never gifted me with any kids and everything, but he did gift my younger brother and friends of mine. So I was just wondering if you could share with us a little bit of your thoughts about how the media portrays fathers, particularly in our community.
Well, one of the things that we try to really focus on with the North Carolina Fatherhood Conference is to celebrate the things that dads are doing well, because we think that when they show up and present in the lives of their kids, then they have a chance to make an impact, help shape the future for their kids. So we want to spend most of our time talking about what they're doing well, how they are taking their kids to school, how they are showing up for different events that the school might be having, when they're having a parent day out or donuts with dads and them showing up at school for that way, or they are showing up at the doctor's office and finding out the information about what needs to occur with their kids. So we using this time to kind of celebrate dads and tell them that they are important. And the ones that might be struggling with paying child support, our information and our experience has been that most of them who are struggling want to do the best thing and want to do the right thing for their kids. And it has been a shift over several years now that dads are proud. You can see a lot of dads. If you watch, you see a lot of dads out and about with their kids, and they're talking about their kids' accomplishments. One of the things that we have as part of the conference, if folks who attend on June the 19th, you'll see, we went on the street and we did something that's called Dad on the Street. And we went around and started asking dads different questions about their kids, about them being fathers and growing up and raising their kids. And it's extraordinary some of the comments they're making about their kids. They're saying things like they are so proud of their kids. They're saying that here's some things that I know now that I didn't know earlier that now I've made apply to the lives of my kids. But a lot of it is about them being proud of their kids, being proud of their journey from where they were and to where they are right now. But most of our conference is devoted on uplifting dads and saying that you're involved in the lives of your kids, and we're just honoring and celebrating that. And all the other stuff is still a small percentage of dads who are not maybe in the lives of their kids or not providing child support. So we want to spend most of our time talking about the dads who are involved in their kids' lives and who does show up, because we try to help them even make a distinction between a father, which is of course a male parent, and a dad who shows up all the time. So if you're going to be a dad, that's a 24/7 job, whereas anybody could be a father, because that's just a male parent. But a dad shows up every day.
As
Yes.
the only single person in the room, if I can just follow up with a question, everything, and this is actually all three of y'all. What do you think is some of the number one lessons that you've learned from being a dad that somebody might be listening right now would love to hear your thoughts about being a dad, and what are some of the lessons that you learned from that process? Because I know, Nick, you're definitely a father. Steve, you're a father as well. And Mr. Perry, I'm assuming that being involved with the Fatherhood Initiative, that you are a dad as well.
I am.
So I was just wondering if some of the lessons that you've learned. So just to give a context, I know that when my nephews were born, my dad would take the young man out to walks and show them around to nature and different other things, getting them engaged in education even before they had gotten involved in school. So he did that as a grandfather, and even to this date, my brother takes my nephews out to soccer matches and other sports matches, and is definitely very much involved in their life and is always doing things with them, even though he's now part of a divorced family, meaning that he and his ex-wife are not together and everything, but he definitely is still very much engaged in their lives. And I would say they probably spend the majority of their time actually with him, if I'm remembering the way that the dynamics work and all of that. But I was just wondering y'all's thoughts of being fathers and the lessons you've learned.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Mark, because the thing is, I'm at grandfather status right now, which is pretty interesting. And I'm watching them grow up like beans, which is the reason I moved to the Raleigh-Durham area, was to be closer to them physically rather than living in Seattle. But very interesting that when I was in high school, I took Fatherhood 1, Fatherhood 2, and Fatherhood 3. Wait, no, I didn't. It wasn't offered. I took Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Algebra 3. That was offered. That didn't do me any good. Okay, so one problem that we have beating up the education system in the United States, once again, is that something that's very important to the fabric of this country is fatherhood. And there are no courses offered, at least when I was going to school in high school. In other words, you didn't take Fatherhood 101. Okay, what does it mean to be a father? What does it mean to be a parent? In other words, it's almost like all of a sudden you have a kid, and then now what do? There's no instruction book that came with it. So what happens is that we have a very big lacking in the United States, not just North Carolina, because maybe you offer fatherhood classes in high school here. I don't know. I haven't been in high school in a long time, but I can tell you where I went to high school in Florida at HB Plant, there was no fatherhood class. There was no family class. It was almost like you get thrown into the bramble bush of your life, and there's no instructions that come with it. And so it makes it very challenging for people, because I think there's a lot of people that will become fathers, and then after a while, grandfathers. So I have to do outside reading on that. There was one thing that we read, the importance of grandparents with their grandchildren can make a difference. Part of the reason is parents today can be stressed, working all the time, running around doing things, and grandparents can come in and fill that role to work with the grandkids and try to help them out in terms of, if they got a fight with their parents, who they go to? They go to their grandparents, go, everything's okay. And plus you can spoil them and send them back. Okay, and then you can correct all the mistakes that you thought you made when you were a parent because you didn't know any better. But I think our education system needs to move and put this forward into our systems. In other words, the family values, the what it is to be a fatherhood, what child support means in case you have to face it, and things of that nature, Mark, because there are no instruction guidelines. I mean, Algebra 3 was worthless. If I had Fatherhood 1, 2, 3, I would be using that today. Algebra 1, 2, 3, I use none of that. I'm not sure why we bothered with that, but that's the way it is. And I like the whole idea of NC fatherhood, except it should be for the whole country. Okay, in other words, the thing is, what Kenneth is doing is great, but it should be for the whole United States of
People are coming
America.
around the
And that can
country.
make a big difference.
People
What?
are
No, I
coming
agree
around.
with you, and I want to hear from Mr. Perry about what his thoughts about some of the lessons he learned and everything, and even coming back to tie it to what Nick was saying. I remember that when my nephews were born, my brother, and probably even me to some degree, even though a lesser degree than my brother, was kind of the one that was always, acting out and causing trouble. And I remember that my dad said to my brother when the boys were born, you better be careful because now it's going to be my chance to get revenge because, grandparents do sometimes do some of that training and everything. So he definitely said, everything that you went through, I want to make sure that you get it back double, if not triple, if not quadruple, and all of that. So, Kenneth, what are some of the lessons that you've learned as a father and possibly even a grandfather as well that you try to pass on to the next generations? And do you do that payback if you've got fathers or you've got kids that are now fathers themselves?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you allowing me to share that. One of the biggest lessons I learned was early on. I am a father. I have a adult son and adult daughter, as well as three grandchildren. And one of my biggest lessons that I learned early on, I used to, with my job with Methodist Home for Children, I travel across the country helping other agencies implement programs. And all of my travel, one day I came back and it was really late. And one of the things that my wife and I always did with our kids was read them a story. And when I got back and my son had late for one of my trips, and my son had already gone, it was in bed. So I always go in and peek in on him and look at him. And when I did, he kind of woke up. And then I said, "Hey, son, just wanted to see you. Go ahead back to sleep." And he said, "Dad, could you read me a story?" And my response said, "Well, I'm kind of tired. Can I do it later?" And he looked at me and said, "Dads don't get tired." And that made me realize that you always have to be present. So what did I do? I read him a story, even though it was 2 a.m. At that time, because that's about being present in their lives, so you can take advantage of those opportunities. And one of the things that the folks who attend the North Carolina Fatherhood Conference going to get is some great workshops. And one of the workshops is about fathers and daughters. And Dr. Shears, who's a professor in North Carolina, talked about how a dad play with his kid is different than how a mom. And by him playing a little bit rough, it helped teach it, particularly his daughter, what is appropriate play and what might not be. That way, because dad is a little bit rougher. So you'll get some great tools and information by attending the North Carolina Fatherhood Conference. But that's the biggest lesson and again, that's part of our theme, that dad had to be present in the lives of the kids so they can take opportunity to shape them or give them a different information, and sometimes just to hear their own story so that they can support them that way.
Yeah, lessons. What about yourself, Steve? What are some of the lessons you learned?
Well, I mean, first of all, I have a great father who's still alive. He's turned 80 this year, and he was a general surgeon. So he didn't, growing up in West Virginia, he lost his parents when they were relatively young. He was always there for us, and I was a bit not too mischievous, but I got in trouble once in school. And one memory I have of my father, I had to memorize the poem "The Raven" by Edgar Allan Poe.
Wow.
And so my father stayed up with me till 5 a.m. and I'll never forget, the sun cracked open and he sat there with me for the whole night, and then put on his surgical greens and went in to do surgery. Then I had to leave when I was 14. I went away, so when I came back, it was light speed, and then I came back as a young man, and we became really good friends. And then my late father-in-law, I learned a lot from fatherhood from him. He was sort of like my second. I married his daughter. He was a colonel in the U.S. Air Force as an immigrant from India, and he died about 3 years ago. And I learned a lot from him about raising a great family. And for me, I'm learning I got to be honest with you. I don't have many regrets in life, but one thing I do believe is that being in public office did take away significant time away from me and my children. It's hard to be a devoted father when you're constantly navigating through the political waters, and it's got harder and harder as years gone by with social media, where I'm fighting not only for the issues in the public, but also
Mhm.
fighting tweets and posts, even at the local level. So now that it's a decade later, I'm finding myself spending more time with my kids, trying to learn from them. And my father says grandfatherhood is the best thing. So maybe I can get a second chance when I have grandkids to be there more. But anyway, I've learned a lot. I mean, I think these kids today, we can learn even more from these kids. They're so aware of what's going on around them. They're so good with technology. They're so good with uh, being change agents. And that's why I began my monologue about Juneteenth being a conversation about what we can teach our children in
Mhm.
terms of the future of this country. Because I believe that America it's a constant battle, as I said in my monologue, between good and evil, justice and the people who don't want justice, and teaching them that it's worth fighting for, right?
Yeah.
But and we can talk about, yeah. But anyway, that's my thought. I mean, I hope I can you know be as great of a father as my dad, but it was a different world, right? I mean, he came
Yeah.
from another country with
Mhm.
$8 in his pocket given by the government of India, and he basically worked, came home, saw his family, went to bed, and worked again. And so he's always like, even though I dabble in different things, he always has a hard time saying, you go to work in the morning when it's dark and you come back when it's dark. And I'm like, well, Dad, I'm not a surgeon.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mr. Perry, I want to come back and ask you a quick question because you definitely mentioned that you got both a adult son and an adult daughter, or maybe even plural in that and everything. I don't remember the numbers, but definitely you have both, at least a girl and a son in your life. What do you see as the difference between, say, raising a girl and raising a son as a father? Because I know oftentimes you hear people talking about a daddy's girl and things of that nature. So just as one that raised both genders, what did you see as the difference in raising those genders, and how did you go about it differently? Because I'm sure there's things that you did for your daughter or daughters that you might have done differently with your sons or sons.
Yeah, I think that traditional things or way people think about how you raise your daughter, I think I fell into that same category that I wanted to make sure I protect her. I probably had a little bit more restriction on her than I did on my son. But it's two things that I think that as dads that you really do with your daughter. One, you model how a man supposed to treat a woman. And you do that by how you treat your wife, what language you use around them, what language you use around other women, and how your interaction are with them. Because they need to see what healthy play is. They need to see when that people have disagreement, and how do you navigate that without demeaning them? How do you challenge each other and do that in a fair way? And then on the flip side, with my son, you have to teach him that language matters, and that him being present and showing up and being responsible matter to him. That people are watching, even when you think they're not. So what you say, what you do, really is important. But the main thing for my son is that it's important for you to show up, be present, and be accountable. Is what kind of the things I really emphasize with him. And with my daughter is to watch, because I have a great wife and she has a great mom. So watch what your mom do, because she's a great model for you. But also watch what I do and how I treat your mom, because that's how you're going to want or have the expectation of how men are going to treat you.
within the workshops, are there going to be any workshops that deal with single fathers? Because, like I said, I've got friends that are fathers, and some of them, for whatever reasons, whether it was divorce, whether it was through the process of becoming widows and all of that, are now single. And of course, we know that that's a whole nother ball of wax, because sometimes you're bringing the kids into the dating fray as well. So I was just wondering, will there be any workshops that deal with that aspect of being a father and also single, and some of the social things that go on with that?
It will be workshops that not only address single dads, but also dads who might be now in a blended family. So teaching them about co-parenting. I think you might have mentioned earlier, maybe that maybe a brother or a friend of yours who might be divorced, where how do you navigate that if you're not present in the household, how you stay connected with that. So the co-parenting, father-daughter relationship, we got a workshop that talks about, hey, dad, let's talk. So it also gives them some tools, how they talk with their kids about the different social issues and how you navigate just growing up, whether it's school relations, how to make some decisions about what you might do. One of the workshops even talks about, and I know this was real pertinent for me growing up, is that how do I navigate when I want to get out of some trouble, when I know it's some trouble. I know my parents have taught me to do something a little bit differently, and how to get away from that when I get some peer pressure. And my parents told me this, and I've heard this in some of the workshops in the past, is that say, blame it on me. So I would say, man, I would love to go with y'all, but my parents would kill me if I did that. I have to get home. So I was able to use them as a way to escape maybe some problems or issues or whatever like that by just making that statement. And they gave me that outlet just by sharing that information. But anyway, I've heard some of that similar in some of the workshops in the previous year. So it's a really good workshop for single fathers that's be there. We have we have two morning sessions from about 9:30 to about 10:45, and then again for 11 o'clock to 12:15. And it's like 14 total workshops, 7 in the first session and 7 in the second session. So some of the participants are actually going to have a little bit of challenge, because they're going to have some great workshops. They're going to have to decide which one they want. They're going to end up being able to pick 2 of them. But out of that 2, they have 14 that could try to have to navigate which one they want, because there's some really high, powerful, exciting, interactive workshops they're going to be able to participate in.
Yeah,
And along those same lines, on social justice, we heard Black Lives Matter was going on, and definitely the fatherhood conversation came up within the Black Lives Matter, because a lot of times, even when that was going on, we heard about the talk in our community, and we know that oftentimes our fathers have to have that conversations about how to deal with the police and law enforcement. So I was wondering, is the workshop going to touch on that at all during this week as well? Because I know that for the last several years, it has definitely been something that has come up in our society, where we've oftentimes had people had to have that conversation with our young people.
It will come up in the workshop, and I'll share with you too. Just before I came on here, we were just finishing up what we call the Strengthening Power Breakfast. And that particular workshop was really looking at what are some impact of the social justice system that we have, and law enforcement, and how do you navigate that in an engagement. So some really good suggestions, ideas that came up from that. But in addition to that, at the workshop, we do have 2 or 3 different groups and workshops that's around those sort of issues. And we also have one for young folks 13 to 18 that is a gentleman, Keon Lake from Asheville area, who says, my daddy taught me that. So they're going to be helping the young folks navigate all of those different type of social issues that they might have to deal with encounter with law enforcement. And part of that is not only about encountering it, but also what do they need to do, and also helping them think about what's their responsibility as they engage with law enforcement, because the goal is for them to end that, and if it is an issue, but they can talk about it later. So we're going to try to kind of share with them too, what are some things you can do that'll help diffuse that situation yourself and not add to something that might gonna make it worse. So it's going to get, and then they're going to push back, I'm sure, because it's going to be open discussions. However, when this happened, here's what I feel. But again, we want them to leave that safe so they can talk about it. So one of the judges who attended our Judge Kroon from Wake County, who had attended our conference in the past, he had mentioned your job is to survive that encounter and then report it later. So we kind of use that as a mantra for them too. Sometimes things happen, so you have to make sure that you're in a position later, if you need a report something, or something didn't happen the way that you thought it should happen, to get through that particular encounter and then later deal with that. You don't need to try to litigate that right there at that moment.
Now the conference is virtual, right, Kenneth?
This is the first year that is virtual.
Virtual, right?
Live.
Okay, so people in California could actually attend it, and
yes,
and people around the world, because this is broadcast to 122 countries. 62 of them are English speaking, and the other countries, English is their second language. It's almost like they have two languages. So people around the world could actually attend this conference. Would that be correct?
That's correct. And traditionally, we have folks who travel from all around the country who come to the conference also, although it's the North Carolina Fatherhood Conference, and most of our attendance is local, but we've had as many as 700 folks, and sometimes as many as 75 of them have been out of the state who traveled to the conference. So it's one of the largest, it's not the largest, but it's one of the largest fatherhood conference in the country.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, we're excited about this. I mean, this is we have a few more minutes with you, Kenneth. We would like you to stay, and I think sometimes, Kenneth, what we do, we talk about different things going on in the world, but I'd like to spend the rest of the time talking about Juneteenth. But for those of you listening, we'll talk about it next week when I return. But a couple of big things: President Putin and President Biden met. And it could be the beginning of what they call the cyber war, with President Biden now saying that if you attack us through a cyber attack, we can retaliate. So that's going to be an interesting conversation as we continue our talk about cybersecurity. There's been some rulings in the Justice Department about asylum. The COVID pandemic continues to worsen in India and other developing countries. But the G7, along with President Biden, has said they're going to ship about 1 billion doses of the vaccine over the next year. So that's good news. And continued discussion about the border and, the big news, President declaring Juneteenth a federal holiday. And
Steve, before you get to the Juneteenth, and I definitely want you to talk even more about that, and I thought that that's definitely an important holiday. There was 2 other news stories that I definitely want to bring up, and one of them actually involved your home state senator. So I understand that the filibuster, and of course we'll talk about this next week as well, may be shortened because Mr. Manchin is apparently backing it, and I understand that it might be shortened down to 55, something that's like 55 hours or whatever that is, but they are saying that they might be shortening the filibuster. And of course we did have another tragic shooting here in North Carolina involving law enforcement, and that was there in Newton Grove, and that was actually involving a police chief and a rape suspect. So hopefully we'll be following that, but that was happening as of yesterday. So that was another case of possible police misabuse and all of that. And actually I did see the video, and it was a very jarring video because it definitely showed them having a encounter and the ways that they were definitely having verbal, like the rise in the voices and everything else. And at some point the officer did pull out the gun and then shot the suspect and everything. But if you see the video, you'll see that it's very rapid and definitely very shocking.
And I'm sorry I didn't mention that. I was going to mention that at the end. I just got back in town, so I'm a little bit behind on the news. But I did hear about that yesterday when I was on WPTF, and Gil Hurd had told me about that. So, just once again, and we're going to hand it back to Kenneth. I mean, I think this brings us. So, anyway, those were some of the Nashville and North Carolina events, and then At the end of the day, I think what's really important is that this is a good segue into the point I was trying to make, is that every time there's progress, there's a setback. And so we've had a lot of setbacks with George Floyd and Andrew Brown, now the Newton Rose situation. So we have to dig down into not only recognizing that it's happening, but what can we do to make these escalations go down? And so I think it's a combination of factors, racism versus bias. What can police departments do to affect bias? And I think these are all conversations, quite frankly, that aren't comfortable for many people. And there's a tendency, it's very easy. How many are ever guilty of that? Well, I don't want to see it, so I'm going to turn the TV off and focus on something else.
Mhm.
And we've got to focus on the things sometimes that divide us. And so, Kenneth, what is your thought about that? I mean, I think that's one thing. That's the point I'm trying to make, is in Juneteenth, holidays and proclamations and remembrances are fine, but I don't think it's enough to deal with what we're dealing with. We need conversations. We need real action. We need real policies, right, that are really going to make change happen. Correct?
The one thing that I have noticed, and I might have a little bit different take on that, is that I think we've had more conversation. If you remember,
Yeah.
since all of the different events have occurred, traditionally, sometimes it has been really outweighed one way. And my notice from looking at the crowds and the different conversations I've been having with different folks, and frankly, with the different organizations who have provided space for folks to talk about this sort of issue. And so I think a lot of it has bubbled to the top, and that people are having these different conversations all over. And I think that's the recipe for having some movement and for things to change. Things have been going on for a certain way for a long period of time. So it is going to continue to take some time for things to get better. But I am encouraged from the movement of the composition of the folks who are marching or holding people accountable. I've been really pleased where we are headed. We have to just keep that going. And one of the things, to my surprise, it has changed. Normally, an event occur, and then we get a little bit of conversation about it, and then it stopped. And what I've noticed, that it has not stopped. It's continuing in all the different social settings that I personally have been attending. I've been noticing folks are having those conversations. I've been witnessing it on TV, as well as I mentioned earlier that I do some work around the country, and even in all of those different parts of the country, whether I'm going out to California or Indiana or in Florida or the different places, that conversation is continuing. So I'm encouraged about that, and I do think the solution to getting better is having that conversation, and us as individuals holding each other accountable, because we know a little bit that when somebody says something, even again, I'll just speak from myself. If I'm in that group, I can say, I'm not sure that's true. This part of what you're saying is true. I have a little bit different take on this way, and I think that helps the conversation, and it gives people pause. Oh, I hadn't thought about it that way. So I'm committed to doing that and being accountable for myself, but also the language and how we address things as well, because we're good. All of us are good at, when things happen, grouping everybody into a certain group. And I know for me, as being a Black person, I know I've been grouped often with a whole lot of stuff, and that's not true. So I'm trying to model that when I hear someone group everybody in a certain area. But I am inspired that it is getting better, in the sense that we're having that conversation, and it's not just Black folks who are talking about it. It's multiple races and in multiple areas that people are talking about. And I know for my agency itself, we had that conversation, and my CEO was open to us having that conversation and bringing in different folks to have that conversation because our staff really wanted that. And I'm seeing that in multiple areas.
Speaking
Yeah,
of multiple areas, I was wondering about the generational thing because I'm a big fan of this young generation, and actually, Steve alluded to it earlier that they're doing a lot of great work in activism and things of that nature. But definitely, they sometimes listen to advice from the older citizens. Sometimes they don't, and they go out on their own. So I was just wondering your thoughts about the generational divide and how that even plays into both fatherhood and into the Juneteenth celebrations. Because I am a big fan of some of our young leaders, be that the squad as they're called over there out of New York, including the AOC and the young lady out of Michigan and a number of others. But I have heard folks sometimes complain that they don't do enough listening to their elders. So I just wondering your thoughts about the generational divide and also your thoughts about how that plays into the fatherhood conversation.
Well, I'm 62, so I've been accused of that also. Sometimes even with my son, my wife and son owns a salon, and some of the suggestions and stuff that he wants to have happen in that, I sometimes said, really, but I've also supported that, and most of the time he's been right because how they might use the media and the different ways that you advertise and that sort of thing. And so I've learned that it's really important to listen. Someone else might have a better idea. Often the young folks go about it a little bit different. The only issue that main thing I have with them, sometimes they are really, really impatient. They want it to happen right now. So we have to kind of sometimes slow them down so they can do all of the due diligence so it can happen. But they have some great ideas. And my experience have been that with the Fatherhood Conference, and that's one of the reasons why we have the conference, is that we do have the different ideas. And one of the strategies that we use, for example, even about who's at the conference, because traditionally a conference or something like that, a lot of folks who attend are folks who are either well off, who might can pay for the conference, or who already have a certain, they would probably attend some of the conferences anyway. And one of the ways that we have grown the conference is that we have as a responsibility, folks who would normally attend, your job is to bring 3 or 5 folks who might not normally attend. And what that does is, one, it does increase the amount of folks who show up, but also it expands the amount of folks who get access to the information. And particularly the folks, that's how you get the information down to where it's needed as well. And then also you get to hear their input and idea, because there's a lot of good suggestions of how to do some things. And sometimes they are a little bit brash about how they say it and when they say it. So sometimes us being a little bit more seasoned help them to say it in a way that might make folks be more open to hearing it. But what they have to share is usually really powerful and really good information.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we got to close out. We've run out of time, so I'm try to do it. Well, Kenneth, we want to thank you for being with us, and I'm going to take a minute to do a last look of just summing up what we did, but remind everyone, ncfatherhood.com. And as I close out this Juneteenth edition, in the midst of a pandemic, one thing that I've realized is that we always want a quick fix when we have a disease or illness, whether we can take a pill, whether we can have heart surgery, whether we can take a vaccination against the COVID pandemic. But there's been no greater disease since the founding of our nation than the disease of racism and hatred, which spreads in the hearts of our nation and has divided us. But Juneteenth celebrations provide us an opportunity to not only look back, but to look forward, understanding that we have a problem of racism and systemic bias, but we can do something about it. I'll close out with a final thought. The Constitution that I hold in my hand, and President Obama has often reminded us of this, is that it says, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union." No union, President Obama reminded us, has ever been perfect. It's taken warriors and soldiers to constantly fight the battle between good and evil, between justice and equality and those who do not want justice and equality. Whether it's John Lewis, who we lost last year, Thurgood Marshall in the 1950s, who fought against separate but equal with the landmark decision of Brown v. versus Board of Education. Whether it's the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, I could go on and on. The instances of today, the racial divisions and the terrible tragedies are forcing us to have a conversation, to work together as all Americans, to work and forge ahead, to always continue our struggle for a more perfect union. We may not get there tomorrow, but working together, we can get there. And that's the beauty of American democracy. The struggle will continue, but we will do it together, not as Democrats and Republicans, but as Americans. I hope that's a principle for our young children and our grandchildren, and maybe something that our fathers can share with their sons and daughters on this very special Father's Day. That's my last look today on World Edition on Pod TV. I want to thank Kenneth Perry from the Fatherhood Conference and my great team for the family at Pod TV. Thank you, and I'll be back on Monday for another edition of World Edition. Be safe, and may the light and love of your hearts always lift you out of the darkness. And we pray for anyone around the country and world who's suffering from any illness of any kind. Thank you. God bless each of you. Happy Father's Day.